Okay, hi everyone. So welcome back to our first parallel sessions of CALC 2025. We're going to start off in this session with Heather Barr, who's going to be talking to us about her research that she did at UCL. So take it away, Heather.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Can I just get a quick kind of check that everyone can hear me okay? Maybe just a nod or a thumbs up or something. I think that's all fine. Excellent. Thank you very much. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure to talk to you all about this project. And I'm just going to switch off my video so that I can't see myself, but you can see the presentation. That's better, isn't it? There we go. So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes and then there will be time for questions. So do feel free to pop things in the chat or to unmute yourself at the end. And I'd also be very happy to chat more about this project kind of more informally. So if anyone wants to reach out via email after the session today, then please do. Before we get started, I am just going to highlight two things. So the first is on the screen now, and that's that this presentation is going to cover themes of sexual violence and trauma. We won't be talking about anything specific, no incidents or events, but we are going to be hearing about their effects. And this is obviously a really challenging subject matter, and it's one which takes a lot of energy to engage with. So my kind of word of warning is absolutely do not engage with this in any way that you yourself are not comfortable with. If you don't want to ask questions, if you don't want to listen anymore, then really that is okay. Do just log off and walk away. I will not be offended. The second thing that I would like to highlight are the two resources that are on your screen now. So the first is the telephone number for the Samaritans Helpline, which is a UK-based resource for anyone who needs somebody to talk to. The number is 116123. And I really encourage anybody looking for support to reach out to them. Second is the website for Rape Crisis England and Wales. And specifically on the screen and on the slides, I have linked to the page, which includes links to support in other countries. So even if you're joining today from outside of England or Wales, please do access this link if you're looking for support. Again, I really do encourage you to go to these organisations if you need to. They genuinely can help. So on your screen now is the research question for this project. How do survivors of sexual assault who access specialist support services find and engage with information when looking for help? Now, this project investigates where sexual assault survivors look for information about support services, and it takes one such service as a case study. This service was Survivor Space Oxfordshire, or SSO. SSO is a charity which advocates for and provides counselling services, support groups, and independent advice to sexual assault survivors. While the research took a case study approach rather than a service evaluation, it offered SSO a snapshot of their users' experiences. And this was useful for the charity who were going through a period of redevelopment and planning. But why was this something that I wanted to explore? Well, as you can see from the statistic on your screen, estimates state that in England and Wales, around 1.1 million adults are sexually assaulted every year. And it is vital that these survivors have access to the care they need. The negative effects of sexual assault on survivors are various, lasting, and well documented. They stretch from physical and mental health problems to social isolation and financial instability. We also know from research with survivors that looking for this help is itself challenging. It's a process of many steps and changes, and one that is inextricable from the psychological effects of what the survivor has experienced. For example, Skinner and Gross conducted research with sexual assault survivors from a college in the United States, and they found that survivors are existing within and interacting with changing contexts that impact their ability to access and use a variety of information sources. And as we'll discuss, survivors need information which connects them to help after sexual assault. But surviving sexual assault complicates a person's ability to look for and use that information. And this is something that is recognised across the board of research with this population. As many as 75% of survivors experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder in the month after assault. And post-traumatic stress disorder has been proven to affect the way that individuals think, with symptoms including amnesia, concentration problems, and cognitive avoidance of trauma reminders. So what we have here is a population of people in need of information, in need of help, whose information seeking is made fundamentally more difficult by the very reason that they need that help to begin with. I argue that care for survivors of sexual assault can be enhanced by a better understanding of information behaviour. As the quote on your screen highlights, information behaviour offers insight into the very many ways in which human beings interact with information, in particular, the ways in which people seek and utilise information. Today, I want to show that a study of information behaviour can help support providers to understand the information needed by potential users. This insight can help specialist organisations to provide information and help in a way that truly speaks to their users' needs. To date, no published UK information behaviour studies have worked specifically and directly with sexual assault survivors. This study fills this research gap and offers an example of the real world value that the insight of information professionals can bring to services which are outside of our usual remit. Of course, as well as the help seeking process, the traumatic experience of sexual assault complicates research with this population. And the majority of us in libraries and information services will have no training or experience to prepare us to work with or conduct research with survivors of violent crimes. And this was an important reason why I sought collaboration with a specialist service provider. SSO are experts in providing care to sexual assault survivors, and working with them brought their oversight and insight to the ethics and research procedures. 4 key research principles were established to protect participants, and these are on your screen. So first, SSO identified a purposeful sample for participant recruitment. This sample was comprised of former service users who had opted in to being contacted about research with and feedback for SSO. This was to minimize the risk of causing additional stress to people currently accessing support. Second, the interview questions were designed in consultation with SSO to ensure that discussion remained centered and focused on participants' experience of information seeking, rather than on the events which led them to seek for help. Third, SSO advised giving participants control over how and where their interview took place. So I offered interviews both online and in person, and also offered all participants a chaperone to attend the interview with them. Finally, I planned with SSO what steps I would take if a participant became distressed during an interview. And these steps included working with the participant to decide whether to terminate the interview. And also, I would debrief immediately with SSO afterwards so that they would then be able to contact the participant directly. It was really important to me to have these principles in place from the start. I'm really aware that we must not broaden the scope and the populations of information research only to cause more harm than good. And I would really encourage anyone thinking about this kind of work to consider collaboration as a research method. Data was collected via individual interviews with 5 participants. All interviews were held online and one included an SSO chaperone. The participants have all been given pseudonyms: Alice, Bella, Kira, Diane, and Emily. I bet you can't guess what the kind of theme there is. A, B, C, D, E. Clearly, with such a small research sample, this project does not intend to represent the experiences of all sexual assault survivors. It intends to offer a snapshot instead. And working directly with SSO allowed me to present this snapshot as a case study, one with real-world relevance for the charity. I'm going to start by drawing on the experience of one participant, Bella. It's really tempting to read Bella's help-seeking journey as neat and sequential. Bella described to me how when, quote, going through a real bad point, end quote, she sought help from her doctor, who, quote, said about SSO, and I came straight home and I signed straight up. Accessing SSO's counselling service, Bella found I got everything I needed and more, and decided to end her counselling sessions early because I felt really good and I knew the waiting list was so long that I said to my counsellor to go on to somebody else. So, having found the help she needed, Bella's concern was for other survivors who hadn't yet. In some way, we see Bella move from identifying a need for help to seeking, selecting, and accessing help, to finally reaching a desire to help others as she has been helped. However, about 6 weeks after I finished my counselling, there was an incident and I just went back totally the other way, said Bella. Research shows that such a setback is typical in recovery from trauma, especially after sexual assault. But what is significant about Bella's experience is that from it, she identified a specific information need. She told me, if they could give you a coping mechanism for afterwards, that would be amazing. So Bella needed help after experiencing a setback. More specifically, though, she needed information. What she identified was a need for information about how to cope after direct contact with the support service ends. And Bella's experience exemplifies the three key findings from this research. First, for sexual assault survivors, needing help often comes hand in hand with needing information. Second, these needs themselves are often unpredictable and can be difficult to define. And third, survivors have a role to play as experts in providing help and information to one another. And through the next kind of few minutes, we'll be exploring these themes through the words of the participants. As we've seen, Bella's need for help was closely tied to a need for information. But to take the second theme, defining these needs is complicated. Indeed, the challenge of defining what help they needed was noted by all participants. And as Diane pointed out, the expectation that a survivor will be able to identify the kind of help they need is itself a burden and frustration for survivors. She said, I would liken it to, I've broken my leg. What sort of surgery do you want? Well, I don't know. The surgeon needs to tell me how to fix it. Knowing help is needed, but not knowing what help could or should look like was a theme for all participants, every one of whom described the decision to seek help as a need to find anything that might be helpful. I've put these quotes on the slide, but I'll read them out also. Alice said, I just wanted like some sort of support. Bella said, I just thought I need to do something. Kira said, I've pretty much just signed up to everything. Diane said, I'm going to try everything I can. And Emily said, I have to do something. I've been carrying this for too long. It is interesting that despite this shared feeling, each survivor's approach to seeking help was different. Alice sought advice from a sexual health service. Bella went to her doctor. Kira took advantage of all SSO offered. Diane took recommendations from healthcare providers and other survivors. And Emily searched online for a telephone helpline. But what was shared here was a search for information about available help. Help seeking started with information seeking. The implication of these first two themes of our findings, the connectedness between help and information and the challenge of defining one's needs, is that support services need to be able to reach survivors who aren't even necessarily sure what it is they are looking for. And of course, this is a challenge for both the help providers and those looking for help. For the participants in this study, resources offering general information about sexual assault were an effective way of making this first contact. For example, Kira returning to good old Google, which led her to finding SSO relatively easily. At first, Kira was looking for information pages. She wanted to find out facts. And these pages led Kira to SSO's helpline. This she used quite a lot for a few years before she then signed up for some of the groups that they organize and the one-to-one therapy. Kira's first need for help was very explicitly a need for information. She told me it's the facts that were important. In particular, Kira said, I needed facts that were really defining terms because it's really difficult to know what is abuse and what isn't. Kira sought this information from SSO's email helpline and from their web pages, which provided case studies and definitions. And perhaps unsurprisingly, all participants mentioned the value of online resources when looking for help. But each participant selected different online resources, depending on their needs and preferences. For Alice, documentaries are very helpful for me, she said. They gave me a lot of closure. They do actually give you quite a lot of information. Alice, like Kira, went looking for facts and information to help her understand what she had experienced. She took steps which all of us in libraries and information services will recognize, saying, I just write the keywords in and quite a lot comes up. But documentaries provided Alice not only with information, but also with a feeling of validation, even community. She described, it's nice to know that there are people out there who are advocating. And this moves us to our third theme of survivors as information experts. Alice identified this both in documentaries and in the SSO group sessions she was a part of. She noted, it's nice to talk to people that actually get it. If you haven't experienced it, you are a bit ignorant to certain things. And this shared knowledge and understanding was really important to Alice. It helped her build a sense of community support and validation. In fact, throughout all of the interviews, survivors themselves emerged as experts from whom others could seek information and practical advice. Diane and Emily, in particular, advised survivors to, as Diane put it, find someone like me to talk to who's been through it. For both these participants, this advice came from a desire to prepare other survivors for the challenges of seeking and receiving help after sexual assault. Reflecting on the information she would share with another survivor, Emily stated, "I would tell them my story so that they felt they had that knowledge." Emily indicated that hearing the lived experience of another survivor might have prepared her better for the consequences she has faced, including health and financial challenges, which she said she would never have known or predicted. Emily said, "I know that SSO and the counsellors did say, this is very traumatic. They prepared me as much as they could, but I could never really have understood the difficulty of what I would go through." Emily's own help seeking had begun with a specific information need. She said, "I was ready now to report to the police, but I needed some help and guidance and to help me on understanding what that process looked like." Her first step was, "I just did a Google search. I came across the SSO helpline and I phoned them immediately." So again, we're reminded that before finding information on how to report to the police, Emily actually needed help understanding who would provide that information. She said, "I had no idea. I didn't. I didn't know what support I would get or what help I would get." We are reminded that not only are help and information needs intertwined for sexual assault survivors, but that defining those needs is itself a challenge. While Emily found the support she needed, Diane was left disappointed by the support the SSO advisory service was able to provide. And the root of this disappointment lay in her expectations of the service from her introduction and referral to it by another provider. She found that actually the advisor role is limited, but I don't think that's understood. For Diane, a recurrent challenge in her help seeking was the lack of specialist information and education in the services with which she interacted. Therefore, she stressed that in general health services, for example, education and spreading of the word is really critical. Diane found herself being signposted around the same people in an endless loop. Not just this, though, but Diane also found that a lot of the places haven't been able to help. Diane's experiences remind us that help seeking for sexual assault survivors can be cyclical and intensely challenging. As I hope we're all starting to appreciate, it takes work to look for help, and this work can go on for a really long time. In addition, all of this can be made even harder by negative experiences of disclosure or help seeking. 4 out of the 5 participants described disclosing their experience only to be dismissed. And Kira, in particular, recognized that a negative interaction could lead to survivors thinking something along the lines of, "Well, I have to put up with this then, and I never access any service again." Similarly, Bella found it was really, really scary, really hard, sort of like talking to somebody because of the reaction we got when we was younger. I was so scared that I didn't go anywhere. As Diane pointed out, education and awareness is vital. Survivors of sexual assault can be exceptionally vulnerable, and the people and services that survivors interact with need to be able to respond to them in a way which acknowledges this vulnerability. This may be especially true for services providing information to sexual assault survivors. And this emerged strongly from all participants, most tellingly when they felt that services had not taken into account their needs. In Emily's experience, information about the legal process and the Crown Prosecution Service and the police needs to be much more open and much more user friendly. And I think they need to remember that the people that they are engaging with those resources are people that are traumatized. Emily found that her position as a survivor of trauma was consistently not taken into account by police. She told me nearly every time they phoned me was on a Friday, and it just ruined my weekend. They just don't think about the impact. Little tiny things can have huge impacts on somebody's mental health. As Emily described, the risks of a process which is not survivor focused are profound. She said, "I had a breakdown and now I'm struggling financially because I've lost my work. I am unwell because of it." This study has, I hope, illustrated that providing information and help to sexual assault survivors is not the same as providing information to another population. It requires understanding and experience in what survivors need and the challenges they are facing. As we've seen throughout this study, participants' need for help was grounded in a need for information. They needed information to help them understand their experience, to report to the police, to manage physical health concerns, to look after themselves emotionally and mentally. And needing so much information can be exceptionally overwhelming. Speaking of intimate partner violence survivors, Westbrook states that the term information overload might have been created with their needs in mind. But these interviews demonstrate that this is absolutely true of sexual assault survivors also. Looking for information is difficult for this population. As Diane said, to get the help one is looking for is really hard, and you have to go out and find it. Finn and Westbrook have reflected on the quandaries resulting from information distribution by those who are not experts in fulfilling information needs. This rings especially true for sexual assault survivors. Emily's experiences with the criminal justice services are telling. Information was repeatedly confusing, incorrect, missing entirely, or shared insensitively. And for the participants of this study, needing help means needing information. But it also means struggling to define one's own needs and looking for a community with whom to share experiences and expertise. Skinner and Gross argue that it is important that agencies develop information expertise to effectively meet the needs of those in crisis. I argue that information professionals have precisely this information expertise. This project presents an example of how information professionals and specialist support services can work productively together. I have sought to highlight the professional expertise and skills-based insight which the information sector can offer. By helping support services to understand their users, information professionals can help to improve resources and outcomes for those in need. I want to pause here briefly and note that there are many ways that this research could be built upon. For example, this study only included people who identify as women, but we all know that it is not only women and not only cis women who experience sexual assault, and I hope that future research reflects this. The present study offers a snapshot of sexual assault survivors' information needs and experiences when looking for help. The findings capture the voice of a group currently understudied and underserved by information professionals. By speaking directly to survivors, it draws attention to the vital need to improve services and outcomes for this population. By taking a case study approach, it gives the study's findings real-world relevant. And I hope that they might provide a jumping off point for other help services to explore how they can provide information to and for sexual assault survivors. This research project has intended to start a conversation between information professionals and specialist support providers for survivors of sexual assault. It is hoped that this conversation will continue and that, as a result, help for sexual assault survivors will be better understood and better provided. Thank you very much. I have just
Thank you,
stopped
Heather.
sharing my screen. Hi, you're welcome.
Thank you, Heather. So I was going to ask first if anyone, we've got about 7 minutes for questions. If anyone wanted to ask a question verbally first, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. Okay, don't think I can see any hands raised. Oh, Sheila, you've raised your hand. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes. So thank you very much for the presentation. It's really interesting. The obvious place for connection, I suppose, is from public libraries, but public libraries are so underfunded. Do you think there's any scope for information professionals in other sectors to kind of put together, well, liaise with these kinds of agencies? I was kind of thinking through in academic departments, there are some ones that might actually have connections with these kinds of agencies.
Yeah,
Whether
absolutely.
there might be scope for different library sectors to actually think about services.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree that so often, we talk about these kinds of research partnerships and, community outreach, and a lot of that burden kind of naturally falls on public libraries. When I did this project, I was working in an academic library at a university, and I think that, speaking from personal experience, lots of universities have really productive relationships with, community support services and specialist kind of charities within their local area, and that can be a really productive way of kind of making connections both within the university and within the library more specifically. So I definitely agree with that. I also now work for the NSPCC, a charity library, and something that we see quite often is that the kind of relationship between our sort of researching and information specialism and then the kind of on the ground work that our social workers are doing is, it's really kind of close and symbiotic together. And I think that actually one thing that I've really taken from that is that any libraries that have any kind of connection really can have an interest in this stuff because the skills are already there. It's like you say, it's about making those kind of personal connections. And sometimes organizations that libraries sit within have those already, and we just don't necessarily realize it. Thank you, Sheila.
Lovely. Thank you, Heather. So we've got one other question in the chat. So the question reads, has SSO responded to your findings in any way? Have they made any changes or trialed new systems, information organization methods?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that question. That's great. So one part of this project was I wrote up all of my findings. This was my MA dissertation at UCL for my library and information masters. So I wrote up my dissertation, and then I also created an executive summary document of recommendations and kind of points of consideration for SSO, which they have responded to. And I was really pleased that they were grateful for it. It's always a bit kind of worrying giving people advice when you're sort of outside of the sector. But one thing that they were particularly kind of focused on and interested in was listening to the voices of survivors. And that was something that kind of came through really strongly, is that wherever possible, they want to be kind of getting people's feedback. And the big question mark is, how do you do that in a really sustainable way? Because it's not right to jump on someone as soon as they've finished a service and be like, how did you find that? Tell me everything. You have to do it in a more considered way. And so I think this hopefully for them has kind of opened the door in terms of continuing this kind of research and just doing, kind of check-ins in a sort of case study setting, because people were really positive about being involved. And we had more people want to be involved than I think they were expecting. So hopefully it's kind of opened the door for that.
Awesome, that's great. And
Thank
yeah, I
you.
was just adding into the chat. It's brilliant to see research like yours being taken into practice and having an
Thank you.
impact.
Yeah.
I can't see any other questions in the chat, so I think what we'll do is wrap up there. But please, everybody, do thank Heather in the chat because that was fantastic.